At this very moment in Pokrovsk, the Ukrainian armed forces ambushed a Russian convoy right at the entrance to the city. These shots stunned everyone. Hundreds of vehicles are in flames. The Russians simply ran away. The bloody ambush finished off the enemy. Syrskyi gave the order for a decisive operation. The Russians are fleeing en masse straight from the front lines. The impossible has happened. An epic strike against Kadyrov right in the heart. The Ukrainian armed forces cornered Dondon. Akhmat is in blood and panic. The Kremlin is trembling. What everyone in Moscow feared has begun. Putin on his knees before Erdogan, a secret meeting on which all support for Ukraine depends. A sensation from Washington, a Republican blew up the Capitol. This law will change everything. All this and more in our upcoming report. Hotspot. Pokrovsk, Myrnograd, the epicenter of hell for Russia, two cities that are breaking the Russian army's back. Panic is spreading through Russian ranks from the strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces. Soldiers are trying to dodge service at any cost, just to avoid being sent to the Pokrovsk direction. What is happening there right now? The hottest details in our report.
The Russians are storming Pokrovsk with columns of equipment. Trying to take advantage of bad weather conditions, the occupiers began their assault using armored vehicles and motorized equipment. The Ukrainian armed forces, who were already expecting the Russian offensive, eliminated the enemy almost immediately. Ukrainian defenders report that the work to destroy enemy equipment and personnel is ongoing. Various components of the defense forces are being involved in the defense of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. The grouping of airborne assault troops, assault units, SBS, SSO, SPU, National Guard, and National Police.
The defense forces of Ukraine control about 13 square kilometers of the territory of Pokrovsk. The total area of the settlement is about 29 square kilometers. Moreover, the area under the control of the defense forces of Ukraine is the high-rise residential district is essentially the commanding heights. And accordingly, fighting is taking place in the so-called industrial zone.
The logistics for the Ukrainian armed forces remain complicated. To strengthen our supply capabilities, an operation is underway to expand the logistics corridors to the city of Sputnik, Pokrovsk, Mirnorad.
The occupiers' efforts are focused on attempts to break through to Syrskyi, which is a key logistical component for the defense forces of Ukraine. In the Pokrovsk direction, the occupiers persist in their attempts to operationally encircle the defense forces of Ukraine in the area of Mirnorad. The main goal of the occupying forces is to establish direct physical control over the locations of the defense forces of Ukraine.
In order to seize Pokrovsk, the Russian command redeployed operational reserves there, which are also being ground down in unsuccessful attempts to capture the city. Realizing this, Russian military personnel transferred to the Pokrovsk direction have begun to be hospitalized en masse. This was reported by the partisan movement Otej. According to the medical unit, the number of requests from the occupiers has already far exceeded the norm. Soldiers are heading to the hospital in entire groups using old injuries, questionable diagnoses, and any excuse to dodge rotation. The fall of Pokrovsk will not lead to the collapse of Ukraine's defenses, but it will weaken Kiev at a sensitive moment in negotiations to end the war. Under the auspices of the United States, writes Reuters.
The main message being pushed by the Russian side is what happens if Ukraine doesn't withdraw. According to agreements regarding the controlled territory of Donetsk region, the Russian Federation seizes this territory by military means. Russian special services are also preparing a series of provocations in Pokrovsk and in the Pokrovsk direction, with the aim of accusing Ukrainian Defense Forces servicemen of using prohibited chemical agents.
No matter what anyone says, the defense forces have remained in active defense for over a year now. In the Pokrovsk direction, currently controlling 40% of the city with the Ukrainian flag raised in its center.
It happened. The Kupyansk encirclement has closed. The Russians are trapped. The AFU have accomplished the impossible. The Russian army is cut off and completely blocked. One less plane for the occupiers. AFU drones are setting incredible records, turning the front into a nightmare for Russia. The hottest news from the front lines. Watch.
A cauldron for the occupiers in Kupyansk. Analysts from the Deep State Project have reported successes by Ukrainian defenders in the northwestern outskirts of the city. In particular, according to their information, as a result of a successful operation, the enemy's defense forces have been blocked. At the same time, enemy enclaves still remain in the central part of Kupyansk.
The operation began with the establishment of a line blocking and cutting off the enemy garrison in the city from its main forces. The defense forces rather swiftly took control of Ryadikivka and Kondrashivka and also established fire control over Holubivka. After that, a sweep operation was carried out in Mern. The occupation-era Soviet name Moskovka refers to the northwestern outskirts of Kupyansk itself.
At the same time, the defense forces continue to identify and eliminate the occupiers. The operation is ongoing. As a result of another well-coordinated operation by the armed forces of Ukraine, an enemy column was destroyed in the Pokrovsk direction. The occupiers tried to take advantage of the weather conditions and, using armored vehicles, cars and motorcycles, attempted to break through from the northern part of the city to the southern part. But the plan failed. On their way, they were met by fighters from the 7th Air Assault Corps and the 68th Jaeger Brigade. But for the Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance groups, the fog turned out to be an advantage. Thus, thanks to poor visibility, fighters from the main intelligence directorate, still in the Pokrovsk direction, managed to infiltrate the enemy's rear. During the raid, the Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance group also managed to destroy the occupiers' command post. In recent days, among others, the forces of unmanned systems have also distinguished themselves in destroying enemy forces. The latter are setting incredible records. In just 2 days, drone pilots destroyed 2 battalions of enemy personnel. And this is just the beginning. Last night, the commander of the unmanned systems forces, call sign Madyar, reported that his pilots, in just one incomplete day, 505 occupiers. Most of them are paratroopers from the 76th Division who were redeployed to Donbass.
That's all you need to know about the current pressure on the front line. The Dobropilsky, Pokrovsky and Gulyai-Polsky sectors. The average daily SBS figure in November was 282. Worms, 8,473 specimens over 30 days. The average daily number for 11 days in December is 395 bodies per day, already totaling 4,325. With
each passing day, the occupiers are losing not only soldiers but also expensive equipment. For example, our general staff has confirmed the destruction of another Russian aircraft. The day before, alarming news spread through Z channels from Kacha, a base in temporarily occupied Crimea, where a combat drone struck an An-26 at the airfield. The Russians also reported losses among their officer corps.
a drone hit an An-26 on the ground. There are dead and wounded.
Another extremely alarming piece of news reached the Russian command from a place they least expected. Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, together with the insurgent movement Black Spark, carried out a successful operation all the way in the Caspian Sea. Off the coast of Kalmykia, saboteurs managed to strike 2 Russian vessels transporting weapons. We're talking about the sanctioned cargo ships Composer Rachmaninov and Askar Saridja, which Russia is using for military purposes.
Orban's gambit. The Prime Minister is preparing a backup plan to avoid giving up power. Even if the April elections are lost, Orban has no intention of stepping down. The Hungarian leader is already calculating a sharp maneuver. What scheme is he preparing, and what does it mean for Europe? All the details are already in the report.
Operation Eternal Power. 15 years as Prime Minister, but even that isn't enough.
Our victory in the elections is so big that you can see it from the moon, and even more so from Brussels.
Hungary is preparing a political maneuver that increasingly resembles the Russian scenario. Viktor Orban is a contender for the role of the second Putin within the EU.
This is, in my honest opinion, a very slippery and complex concept. You simply can't say, for example, Orban can't be absolutely pro-Russian. He has to be pro-Hungarian. And in fact, that's no coincidence. His ratings are dropping because as of today, he is too pro-Russian. And in this sense, if Orban completely falls under Moscow's influence, it could further fuel the engine of protests within the country.
The turning point will be the parliamentary elections in 2026. According to polls, Orban's party could lose for the first time in many years. And this is exactly where the plan to rewrite the constitution and take the president's seat comes in.
The reason, by and large, is just one. It's the desire to stay in power as long as possible. For what purpose? In order to steal as much money as possible. And in fact, simply keeping oneself in power is also enjoyable. It is quite possible, indeed highly probable, that the new government will thoroughly investigate the clearly criminal and egregious offenses committed by him and his inner circle of associates while they were in positions of power and authority.
Hungary today is a parliamentary republic. Key decisions are made by the deputies and the government. But Orban wants to change the very model of power. He wants to strengthen the role of the president so that he becomes the central figure.
If this is solely a matter for the parliament alone, then I truly think that Orban might indeed try to do it. That is precisely why I say I have several different and significant questions arising from this situation. What exactly will Brussels choose to do in this particular situation? And what will the ordinary people ultimately decide to do?
Orban has long been a political ally of Putin, so the question of whether there is any influence or support from Moscow in this process remains open.
What do you mean, might? It's not just that it might be involved, it's already fully involved in this scheme. Because Orban can't behave like this unless he has a plan for where he'll get the money. If he doesn't have a calculation for where the money will come from. That's why, of course, there will be a flood of Russian money there. And there will be all sorts of Russian political strategists, propagandists, and so on. But
what could this mean for Hungary itself?
For Hungary, this will mean a sharp escalation of internal contradictions, and possibly the outbreak of mass protests that could turn into a revolution. If the ratings are falling, it means that Orban's position is not interesting to Hungarians. If people in Hungary prefer a different stance and Orban wants to forcefully impose his will and break everything, well, this isn't Moscow, so to speak, and it's unlikely that Hungarians are ready to swallow all of this.
A separate topic is Budapest's relationship with Kyiv.
Ukraine is not an independent state. Ukraine is not a sovereign state. Are you really the ones holding Ukraine together? It's the West that's keeping it afloat. We are giving Ukraine weapons. Ukraine should not behave like a sovereign country.
The strengthening of Orban's role could also affect Ukraine.
Of course, it will affect Ukraine, without a doubt. Because the more Orban falls into the Kremlin's embrace, the worse it gets. Accordingly, he is already starting to promote the idea that, well, obviously peace must be made at any cost, and that Ukraine should be divided. In other words, Orban will be pushing the Kremlin's narrative of dividing Ukraine. In my opinion, this is obvious.
This is not the first time Orban has raised the issue of expanding the president's role. Over his years in power, he has already revised the election rules. And on December 10th, the Hungarian parliament even approved a bill that will make it more difficult to remove the president from office in the future. However, at the same time, Orban's official representative called these reports fake.
Like in the story with the Kremlin, we always trust our own eyes and our own ears. So, if we see that bills are already being pushed in parliament to complicate impeachment or something like that, for the president, and tomorrow there will be an increase in presidential powers. It's clear where this is heading. But again, we trust the polls. We understand that Orban will most likely lose the spring elections, and that's why he's already trying to do something today. To do something.
An epic blow to Kadyrov. Visu cornered Dondon. The strikes pierced the heart of Kadyrov's men. The Kremlin is in panic. What the entire Moscow elite feared has begun. There is no turning back. What devastating surprises await Akhmat? Watch right now.
The Office of the Prosecutor General has officially submitted the case against the head of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, to the court. The wording of the charges sounds extensive. Organizing the invasion, leading illegal armed groups, aiding an aggressive war, torture, cruel treatment of prisoners. The list is long and quite telling in its own way.
People of Ukraine, where are you looking? Come out and make your voice heard.
According to the investigation, formations subordinate to Kadyrov, from Rosgvardia units to the so-called Akhmat fighters, actively participated in the assaults on Ukrainian cities and in suppressing civilian resistance. Ukrainian prosecutors point out that these are systematic violations of the laws and customs of war. And it's not just about the fighting, but also about the famous calling card of the Chechen units. heroism videos pre-edited in advance.
Hello there. May I ask, where exactly are you originally from? We're from Chechnya. We've been waiting for you. Thank you so much. We love you and we've been waiting for you.
A separate point in the case is that Kadyrov gave orders to his subordinates that contradicted all norms of international humanitarian law, including directives. Not to take prisoners after the strike by the SU on the facility in Gudermes. The investigation has also gathered evidence of Ukrainian prisoners of war being used as human shields. And this already sounds like a very specific criminal charge. However, while Kadyrov tries to remain silent in the legal field, he does the opposite in the information space. His Telegram channel has long turned into a stream of aggression, where wars, threats, and curses follow one after another.
We have to kill and we did it, but we won't do it anymore. We shouldn't cry when our motherland needs us. When the sovereign state, the esteemed president, truly needs us, then we must leave indeed. Your shortcomings to yourself. Today, a steadfast believer, someone who truly loves and deeply respects himself, will certainly not just sit idly at home doing nothing. He will find himself a suitable rifle. He will find all the necessary everything he needs and all the essential equipment, and he will go to fight against these malevolent fiends, all against this insidious Satanism.
Meanwhile, the war has reached Chechnya itself. Ukrainian drones are striking more and more frequently at targets connected to its structures. Footage of recent attacks on Gudermes and other sites within the Republic has spread online. This is an unexpected turn for people who for many years considered their region an inviolable fortress.
An explosive morning for Kadyrov. Ukrainian drones broke through the much-vaunted defenses and struck directly at the elite Grozny city towers. Fittingly, the offices of the Security Council and law enforcement were hit. This is already the second successful attack in a week. First the FSB, now the city center.
Kadyrov's reaction, as always, is loud. Promises of harsh revenge, talk of fascist Ukraine, and statements that every strike on Chechnya will have fatal consequences. He even announced that he was ready to pay his fighters for every
Completely, utterly, totally, absolutely downed Ukrainian, referring to the people, language, and culture of Ukraine, a large country in Eastern Europe. The flying drone. The shame is harsh. Our targets will be only military facilities. And you will see just how untouchable the Chechen Republic and Russia as a whole are.
This public aggressiveness has long become part of his political image. Reactions in the style of "I'll show you, will respond, this was a mistake" come out weekly, sometimes even daily.
We have fought, we will keep fighting, and we will continue to destroy these decorations. I want to declare, to tell everyone who shares our joy and our sorrow, tomorrow and until the end of the week, we will be ruthless. And
all this is happening against the backdrop of constant discussions about his health, Kadyrov's. The internet is abuzz with rumors about his illnesses. Some say he has a serious diagnosis, others talk about severe flare-ups, and some mention how quickly his appearance is deteriorating.
We all see it. Not just me, but all of us can see what condition he is in. The way he moves, the way he talks clearly shows that he has not only pancreatic issues, there's a whole host of problems, because in the latest videos he literally looks like a zombie.
But no matter how Kadyrov himself or his videos look, the court will deal with war crimes and with those who gave the orders, supported them, filmed them, and posted them to social media with music.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. Shock. Putin bows before Erdogan at a secret meeting that could determine support for Ukraine. What is the Turkish leader planning, and why is the Kremlin in such a hurry? Moscow is anticipating change. All the shocking details in our report.
While world capitals are trying to find a way to achieve a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, a meeting that could change the balance of power may take place in Ashgabat, the capital of Turkmenistan, where the International Forum on Peace and Security is being held. We're talking about a potential conversation between Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and the Russian dictator Putin. In
an era when uncertainty, conflicts, and vulnerability are rapidly increasing around the world, it is more important than ever to take responsibility for strengthening international dialogue, cooperation, trust, and peace. Drawing on our history, geography, and civilizational heritage, we are making every effort to uphold the principles of dialogue and peaceful coexistence. We strive to maintain good neighborly relations and to create a belt of stability and security around us. We sincerely wish for a swift end to the war between our northern neighbors, Russia and Ukraine, with whom we share deep historical and mutually respectful relations. Turkey is ready to provide real support to any diplomatic initiatives aimed at achieving a ceasefire and establishing peace, including the Istanbul process.
However, according to experts' forecasts, we should not expect any breakthrough decisions.
It will be purely an information exchange type of process. That is, there will be an exchange of information. The exchange will be perhaps the preparation of some elements of a peace track, including the regulation of shipping in the Black Sea, which is extremely important for both Russia and Ukraine, as well as for Turkey. It is quite possible that some economic issues will also be addressed. After all, there is also the issue of the South Stream pipeline, which runs through Turkish territory, and Akuyu, and the construction of nuclear power plants in Turkey by the Russians. These topics may also be discussed, because it's not necessarily only a military track, but also one connected to the military track. In the area of economics and energy, which are extremely important for all three parties.
Meanwhile, in an interview with CNN, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan stated that Ukraine is now facing a difficult choice. Europe must help official Kyiv make the right decision.
Europe should help Ukraine in making certain difficult decisions together with Ukraine. Indeed, some choices, some decisions are very tough for Ukraine. But in order to prevent greater losses, that is for the greater good, it is necessary to eliminate evil here. Meaning the bad, in other words, a choice must be made. I know this is difficult for everyone, especially the issue of territory is incredibly hard. May God never let anyone go through this.
For Ankara, this is not just diplomatic rhetoric. Turkey is trying to regain its status as a mediator, reminding everyone that it was in Istanbul last summer where 3 rounds of negotiations took place. And that back then, despite skepticism, the parties were able to make progress on some issues. For example, in humanitarian prisoner exchanges and certain security mechanisms.
This laid the groundwork for negotiations that continue today. We are ready to play this positive role. Look, right now the Black Sea has become a battlefield. The war has spread to the Black Sea. Now in the Black Sea, commercial ships and tankers are being attacked. That is, if the war continues, it will spread to other regions of Europe as well. In other words, God forbid, it must be stopped here.
But can yet another round of talks bring peace closer in Ukraine? The question remains open. The details of a possible meeting between Erdogan and Putin remain unclear. Neither Ankara nor Moscow is giving direct confirmation. They are limiting themselves to hints and cautious wording. However, one thing is clear, any contact will inevitably touch on the topic of the war. And it's important to remember that Turkey has repeatedly emphasized its support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and hopes to play the role of mediator, but without concessions that would undermine international law. A sensation from the United States. A Republican has shaken up Capitol Hill with a bill to withdraw from NATO. The alliance is a relic of the Cold War. What is behind this ultimatum, and how realistic is it that the US will actually leave NATO? All the shocking details in our report.
A member of the US House of Representatives, Republican Thomas Massie, has introduced a bill for the United States to withdraw from NATO. This became known from the text of the bill which Massie published on the social network X.
NATO is a relic of the Cold War. The United States should leave NATO and use that money to defend our own country, not socialist countries. Today I introduce Bill H.R. 6508 to end our membership in NATO. In
his bill, Massie stated that NATO was created to counter the Soviet Union, which collapsed more than 30 years ago.
Since then, U.S. participation has cost taxpayers trillions of dollars and still carries the risk of involving the U.S. in foreign wars.
This bill requires U.S. President Donald Trump to officially notify NATO of the withdrawal no later than 30 days after the law comes into force. Additionally, the document states that the bloc's original Cold War-era purpose no longer aligns with the national interests of the United States. The bill states that the European members of NATO have sufficient economic and military potential to ensure their own defense. And it prevents the use of American taxpayers' money to fund the organization's joint budgets. But to fully understand such a statement from this Republican, you first need to know who Thomas Massie is.
This congressman is quite a rather peculiar congressman. He is, let's say, a representative of the Republican Party community associated with the MAGA movement. That is, in many ways, he is an isolationist and advocates for minimizing government interference in people's lives. And overall, he supports the idea that the United States should minimize its involvement in implementing any kind of foreign policy.
Political scientist Petro Oleszczuk is convinced that it cannot be said that this opinion and such a loud statement by Massa is actually mainstream in the United States.
However, in the context of the White House introducing a new edition of the US foreign policy strategy, which has already sparked heated debate not only in the US but also around the world, he is probably trying to use this trend in some way to implement his own vision for the future of the United States.
Reuters, citing sources, reports that last week a meeting took place in Washington between Pentagon officials overseeing NATO policy and several European delegations. During the talks, Washington did not announce any plans to leave the alliance, but wants Europe to take on most of NATO's conventional defense capabilities, from intelligence to missiles. The deadline set by the Americans is 2027.
Shifting this burden from the US to the European members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization will fundamentally change how the United States, one of the founders of the post-war alliance, cooperates with its most important military partners.
Furthermore, according to media reports at the meeting, Pentagon representatives noted that Washington is still not satisfied with the steps Europe has taken to strengthen its defense capabilities after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
With Trump's arrival, these negative sentiments are intensifying. The United States constantly declares that it is not interested in providing special protection for Europe, that Europe should defend itself, and that their priorities lie in the Pacific region.
The media reports that American officials have told their colleagues that if Europe does not meet the requirements by 2027, the US may cease participation in certain NATO defense coordination mechanisms.
What is the peculiarity of this strategy? Although the strategy does not explicitly call for the United States to leave NATO, it clearly states that the United States will reduce its participation in NATO programs and that Europeans themselves should be the primary ones to defend themselves. Overall, the protection of Europe is no longer considered a particular concern of the United States. At the
same time, several European officials have stated that the 2027 deadline is unrealistic. Regardless of how Washington assesses the progress, Europe needs more than just money. It also needs the political will to replace certain US capabilities in the short term.
We have clearly stated the need for Europeans to take the lead in the conventional defense of Europe. We are committed to working through NATO coordination mechanisms to strengthen the alliance and to ensure its long-term viability as European allies increasingly take responsibility for conventional deterrence and defense in Europe.
But regardless, one thing is clear. There are quite a few questions piling up for NATO. And the Americans themselves have made it clear things will not be as they were before.
For now, Congress is not ready to vote for the US to leave NATO. However, this is a certain indicator of the trends observed in American politics. So probably for now, the United States will not be leaving NATO. But for now, the trend is that NATO is becoming an increasingly elusive structure. And the question will arise, will the United States really defend its NATO allies? So far, in the context of Trump's actions, all of this looks very
That's all for now. For more breaking news from the front, tune in to the next episode.